Hi, I'm Dylan Paris. I'm a musician, I make videos, and today I want to talk about the M1 iPad Pro. Now, I've actually made a few videos about the M1 iPad Pro, some of them talking head stuff like this. Other videos I'm actually using the M1 iPad Pro to make songs in various apps. What I want to talk about today is the hype of the M1 when it came out, specifically the M1 iPad Pro, and how I feel about the iPad after owning it since it came out, which I'm guessing is probably close to a month, although I don't have the exact details. I'll put them here, I suppose. So if you've been keeping up with the news as far as iPadOS 15, WWDC 2021, and all of the things that happened versus what tech YouTube and music YouTube thought was going to happen, then you probably know a lot of people are pretty disappointed with the iPad Pro. I'm one of those people, and I've really tried not to be. I'm one of the people who pre-ordered the 16 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte iPad Pros before they were released, which meant that WWDC happened 2 days after my return window had closed. I will readily admit that I got caught up in the hype. And, people say not to buy technology or anything really based on the promise of a future software update. You should only buy technology based on what it can do when you buy it. I'm an adult, I read the internet, I knew what was being promised with the iPad versus what people thought could happen, and I bought it anyway. Because I got caught up in the hype. And so what I want to talk about today is being kind of let down by the iPad Pro. Mostly just knowing how much power is in it and what that same exact chip can do in other computers. The M1 MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, iMac, Mac Mini, these are machines that can really take advantage of the hardware and run pro apps like Final Cut and Logic and third-party apps like the Adobe Suite or Ableton Live. When they made that ad showing Tim Cook, Mission Impossible style, taking the M1 out of a MacBook and putting it into an iPad, I think I just got some unrealistic expectations about what that would be. I should have known better. Tech YouTube and tech people in general know that the M1 is just the A14X. It was already an iPad chip, and there's always been really high storage iPad Pros. There have been 1 terabyte, even 2018 models. And that one had 6 gigs of RAM when the rest of the storage options had 4. But there was something about Apple putting 16 gigs of RAM into an iPad after having 6 be the high end. That was just too tempting for me. I just had to know why they were doing this. And at least now it seems like they don't know why they were doing that. And we certainly don't know why they were doing that, because nothing can take advantage of that right now. On the newest version of iPadOS 15 beta, apps can request to use more than 5 gigs of RAM. 5 gigs of RAM per app used to be the limit, which made sense if you only had 6 gigs of RAM or even 8 gigs of RAM. You could make an argument that you wouldn't want. I had to change the scenery because my neighbor's dog will not stop barking. That's really fun. I'm excited about that for sure. Anyhow, there was just so much more power in this new iPad, and it just seemed like there was going to be a reason to use it. And I made some pretty overly optimistic videos about what could possibly come to the iPad. And I think in the really long term, that's probably right. If we talk about 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, I think everything that we want in the iPad will probably be there in some form. I think we'll start to have pro apps. I think we'll start to see better external monitor support, potentially even Mac apps being ported in a different way, a more universal standard across all of the ARM devices, including Mac and iPad. But what's happening now is that Apple, per usual, is asking people to pay a lot of money to be guinea pigs while they do this. And it's the same thing that happened with the 2018 iPad Pro, which when it launched was still iOS, not iPadOS. When it launched, there wasn't mouse support. The Magic Keyboard didn't exist. And so I was hoping to, make a more optimistic video when all this was said and done. That, despite the fact that the power wasn't totally being taken advantage of, there's still so much you can do with it that's awesome. And that's true, it's just that it's also true of last year's iPads, and to a certain extent, 3 years ago's iPads. Even the iPad Air 4, which is substantially cheaper. You see, I bought the 11-inch iPad Pro, so I don't even get the mini LED. I don't get the fancier display tech. I'm rocking basically the same hardware as 2020, except for more RAM and a faster CPU and a substantially faster GPU, which is cool for games, I suppose, but it's going to be a long time before games take advantage of that. And so I find myself having one of what I sometimes refer to as like a existential crisis, pardon the pun. But I'm looking at all the tech I own, and it just feels out of balance. I really thought I'd be able to do more with the iPad than I can. And because I can't do those things, I kind of feel swindled. I feel like I was, I was a Best Buy dad. I went into Best Buy not knowing anything about TVs and got sold a $2,000-$3,000 TV when all I really needed was a TCL $500 55-inch. Because for what I do and for what basically anybody does with an iPad Pro, 16 gigs right now is not just overkill, it's not being used. And maybe in 4 months or less, when iPadOS 15 is fully baked, there will be a whole suite of pro apps and other different things you can do that actually take advantage of that RAM. But right now, there's not at all. And I'm just kind of tired of being a guinea pig for Apple, paying for these products before they can actually do what the Macs can do and what other machines can do, especially knowing how much power is in this thing. What was so compelling for me was that this device, this thin and light tablet, has the same, if not more power in almost every spec than my old 16-inch MacBook Pro. It's almost the opposite of every other Apple situation in which, we say raw specs don't matter. That used to be and still is a defense that people use when comparing iPhones to Android phones, because iPhones have a lot less RAM and, insert spec here. On paper, Apple can sometimes seem less equipped, and yet in practice, somehow, these devices can be more powerful. Not always, but sometimes. This situation is the opposite, where the raw specs don't matter because the raw specs aren't being used. And when Apple went out of their way to showcase new features for the iPad, they showed using the brand new mini LED 12.9-inch iPad Pro, which starts at, I believe, $1,100 for an extremely small amount of storage, by the way. They showed that essentially just as like a companion device for another $1,300 iMac and $1,300 MacBook Pro. And that just kind of sucks as someone who spent $1,500 on an iPad. And now is absolutely the time to be like, you're an idiot. Why would you buy a $1,500 iPad? That's honestly valid. A lot of comments on some of my earlier videos were like, you probably shouldn't have done this. And you know what? They were right. I probably shouldn't have done this. And so we get to, what am I going to do next? I'm going to sell this thing. I am. It would take some kind of miracle from the Apple gods in the next couple of weeks or less for me to actually think this is a smart thing to own. I already know I lost money because when I sell it, I'm certainly not getting full MSRP back, but I don't think I'll lose too much. So, if I take $100, maybe $200 hit, fine, lesson learned. Does that mean I'm done with iPads? Absolutely not. Using this thing, I've been reminded so much of what I enjoy about iPads. When I went from the iPad Pro 12.9-inch to the iPad Air 3, I kind of felt like something was missing. I might just stick with the iPad Air 3 because I still have that. But I also might get an iPad Pro 2020 and just get the same exact silver 11-inch model. Yes, it only has 6 gigs of RAM. Yes, in a year or 2 or 3, maybe there will be more stuff you can do on the iPad that can't be done on that Pro. But 1, I kind of doubt it. And 2, if that's true, this will be cheaper. There will be a newer one that's more powerful, potentially even another one after that, depending on how many more they make, right? I'm tired of being the person who buys in on day one and finds all of the limitations that I paid the privilege to have when people after that can save money, buy last year's hardware, buy discounted hardware, and not have to deal with the crap I've had to deal with. Should you buy an M1 iPad Pro? For just about every single person, I think the answer right now, in July of 2021, is no. If you bought one, should you do what I'm doing and get rid of it? I also think that answer is no. But it depends. If you bought the 8GB RAM, 256, 128, 512 iPad Pro, I think you bought a really nice future-proof device that you will actually be able to use pretty soon, if not already. If you bought a 16 gig RAM iPad, do you see anything on the horizon? Has Apple even tried to show us what the point is of this hardware? Because I'm not seeing it. In that situation, you can hold on to it for 5 years. You'll absolutely find a use for it. The counter argument is, well, you could wait 5 years and then buy 5 years from now's version of the iPad that does everything we want it to do today. All these decisions, personal finance, they're all so subjective. If you are already using every ounce of power out of your iPad, maybe it's worth the upgrade. But it's hard to imagine that a 2020 model couldn't serve you just about as well as a 2021 model right now, because at least in the most current version of the software platform that isn't a beta, there's almost no difference in operation. The only thing I can think of really is the game Divinity Original Sin 2. If you really want to play Divinity Original Sin 2 at 60-ish frames a second, and you don't own a console of any generation, and you don't own a PC or a Mac, then sure, maybe it's worth getting the M1 iPad Pro. I know there will be more apps. Hopefully someday when you're watching this in the future, a year from now, 2 years from now, this sounds ridiculous. You've got Final Cut, you've got the entire Adobe suite somehow, you've got Logic and Ableton's here too, and I sound like an idiot. But I feel like an idiot because right now, today, this thing is just overkill. And I can't recommend it. And I actually really think this needs to be a moment of reckoning for tech YouTubers in general. I'm a responsible adult. I made my own decisions. I hope you are as well. But I don't think people had hype for no reason. I don't think, whether it's Apple's marketing or YouTubers or the rumor mill, there were a lot of reasons to think more was going to happen. And it didn't. And so everyone who said it's not going to happen gets to look right. And they are. But there were a lot of people at play here, and I just feel weird about how this whole thing went down. I think we were sold hype that didn't come true. And so yeah, the M1 iPad Pro, absolutely beastly. Just a fantastic machine in spec form, but most of the things that make it great are also in the 2018 and 2020 iPad Pros, especially if you're like me and you get the 11-inch. If you have the 12.9 inch, you have that fancy new screen. I think that's pretty cool. I almost kind of wish I just got an 8 gigabyte 12.9 inch M1 iPad Pro. But honestly, the form factor's so big. I really like this tablet experience of the 11 inch, so that's the trade-off for now. But another problem you won't have in 2 years, when you can get both sizes in mini LED, when you can actually use the specs, when they have an M2 or an M3 and they can run Blender with, 8K rendering. But today, no way, man. Just get the iPad Air 4 potentially, get a used iPad 2020 or, iPad Pro 2020. My friend was in town and we ended up finding a 12.9 inch 256 gig 2020 iPad Pro on Facebook Marketplace for like $800 cash. That was a great machine. I bought that exact same iPad last year for $1040 or something. So that's the move. Get last year's iPad, save some money. Let the guinea pigs like me make the mistake of buying in. Let the devs catch up to the hardware. And then in 2 years, when it's actually upgrade time, or 3 years or whatever, and you actually see things that can only be done on the newest iPad Pros, you could buy this one for, $700 on Facebook Marketplace. Anyway, thank you for watching. I would love to hear your experiences with technology. Have you had experiences where you went and bought something because of the hype and really felt kind of let down, or has the hype lived up for you? Anyway, consider liking and subscribing, and if you are interested in what I do, I've got lots of videos of music creation, and I also have music on Spotify or Apple Music under my name, Dylan Paris, linked below. All right, I'll see you next time.